Six. Oh, all right. I don't know what the point of a countdown is. They're not going to use it. All right. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Hogmolly Hustle. It has been a weird few weeks for both of us. Of course, the holiday season is always interesting. Got Christmas, got the New Year's. Very, very busy time. We haven't been able to come in together, meet up, and record. But we are back. And you are in a new location. You have a new job. You're living in a new area. I'm starting another year down here in the new area I'm at. My second year officially at this new area. So that's pretty cool. So how you be feeling, bud?
I'm great, Caleb. Getting situated down here. For those of you that don't know, new job, Columbia, South Carolina. I'll be an account manager, if I can talk. It's been a long week. Account manager and ticket sales for the Columbia Fireflies. They're a minor league baseball organization, Kansas City Royals affiliate. So super great week this week. Getting to know everybody on the staff and just getting settled into Columbia. Moving into an apartment. It's tough to get a couch onto the third floor. But that's what friends are for. So excited to get rolling down here, and it's good to be back. I was thinking the other day, like, it's been several weeks since we had a pod, and so much has happened that I've kind of been stewing on everything from Antonio Brown, antics to bowl season. Everything that's just been going on is so crazy, but it's a good time to get it back going. We got a great week ahead of us, and I'm excited to watch some football.
Right. And for the record, friends to help you move in. He didn't call me to help him move in, so kind of hurts my feelings a little bit there. But you know what? Now I'm glad you don't have a drill to put you together.
Be thanking me.
You know what? I just want to sweat to help you, bud. But you didn't give me that chance. I was busy that day anyway, man. It's fine.
When I move out, you'll be the first person I'll call. How about that?
All right, thanks, bud. I'll be busy that day. All right, so you mentioned this. I didn't have this on the little docket to start with, but Antonio Brown's a big thing, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Man.
A lot to unpack
here. Is that not the strangest thing that you've ever seen in a live game?
I mean, it's up there. Alongside, like, Joe Horn pulling out a cell phone from the goalpost and, dialing the number to celebrate a touchdown. It's up there with some of the NFL football Foleys you would see years ago on NFL Network from like the 60s and 70s. One of the craziest things I've ever seen at any sporting event. For those of you that don't know, Antonio Brown, wide receiver, former wide receiver now of the Tampa Bay Bucks, just took his pads off in the middle of the game and started walking across the field to go to the locker room.
Yeah,
he checked out completely.
And if you haven't seen that, I'm not really sure what you're watching because I don't know why I'm off center now. My chin's disappearing. I'm trying to make this work better. I didn't get taller. Hold on.
Definitely not. No.
It's been like 2 weeks here that we haven't been doing this. I've fallen apart. All right. Yeah. So if you haven't seen what's been happening, Antonio Brown, you haven't been watching. There's some definite fallout with the team since we've had some time to let it stew a little bit and think about it and see how everything broke down. We see there's some problems with Bruce Arians. There's some sort of ankle injury that he didn't feel comfortable playing with, but he had been cleared by the team to play with. You saw that during that little breakdown, Mike Evans came over and said, "Hey, man, you need to calm down a little bit. Like, this is having a tantrum here." And he says, I'm out of here. Just rips his stuff off and leaves. And then Tom Brady defends him. After Bruce Arians says he's done. He's no longer a Buccaneer. Tom Brady's like, hold on a little bit. Like, we don't have many guys to throw to. Let's not do that just yet. And then Antonio Brown comes out and he throws Tom Brady under the bus. he says, if I'm your boy, why am I getting paid so little? Gronk's your boy. Why is he getting paid so much? Why am I getting paid so little? Why am I on a prove it deal? Who's the best receiver out on that team? It's Antonio Brown, right? I know. I definitely think if you're talking about prime Antonio Brown, yeah, I think that's pretty
Absolutely.
clear. I think absolutely he's the best receiver. It's prime Antonio Brown. This is 33-year-old Antonio Brown. He's still really good, still better than the average receiver. Uh, I think Antonio Brown personally is a top 10 receiver. I think that if you just look at prime Antonio Brown, you just look at all those stats. Not right now, because right now there's a whole lot of things you got to take into consideration. But if you just look at what his resume was before everything went all to hell, he was on pace to be
His Pittsburgh
the second or
chapter.
third. He was on pace to be the second or third best receiver of all time, just statistically speaking, and it wasn't going to be close. All he needed was a few more 1,000-yard seasons, and he was there, right?
I mean,
It's crazy.
if you have played fantasy football in the last 5 to 7 years, you know that this guy is a producer on the field. We're talking 100 plus receptions. We're talking like 1,500 yards or more, touchdowns. I mean, to be as small as he is, he was a serious red zone threat. Um, the guy was incredible, and he was a big part. Another thing that happened while we were gone this Monday, Big Ben retired, right? Or, well, played his last game at Heinz Field, I should say. He was a huge part of kind of the second half of Big Ben's career. If Antonio Brown is not in Pittsburgh, I don't know if Big Ben is able to stick around this long. I think that the organization might have moved on from him earlier. And so, giving Ben a great receiver to throw to, a guy who would just get open and put the ball in his hands and get out of the way and let him go to work. And I think people kind of forget just how good he was from, I don't know, 2014 to 2018, whatever that window was, because of what has happened since he went to Oakland. Right. When he made that switch from Pittsburgh, it's like the off the field antics of Antonio Brown's career were brought to the spotlight, to the forefront, and all of the achievements, the accolades, all of his skill as a player and what he did on the field, which was still good things, no one talked about, because he's doing things like refusing to play because he can't wear his favorite helmet, getting frostbite in a hydro cooling chamber for recovery. Um, various disagreements and spats with players and coaches. I'm sure I'm probably missing something, but then this week, walking off the field the way that he did. And a lot of people are starting to connect the dots that he has had a history of concussions. We all remember that hit from Montez Burfict years ago that was a violent hit, and a lot of people speculate that CTE could be at play here. Is Antonio Brown's actions, the way he acts and carries himself, is that kind of a side effect of brain damage? And we don't know, the extent of that. I think that's kind of where Tom was speaking from, is that, he said, he's my teammate. I've got a lot of respect for him, trying to stick up for him. And I think Tom kind of understands AB's personality the same way that Michael Jordan understood Rodman's personality in the 90s. If you watch that Last Dance documentary, it feels like MJ kind of understood Rodman's personality. He could kind of bring the best out of him. And even though Rodman was kind of a wild bull in a china shop, MJ had a way of kind of calming him down, narrowing his focus and accomplishing great things together. And I think that's what Brady was able to do last year in Tampa Bay. Um, it's just that this year, I don't know if things just flew off the rails. There's a lot of speculation that AB might have been playing on, again, a bum ankle, like you said, and that the way that the medical staff handled that injury and told him to get out there even though he was hurt, that's like a rumor that's floating around Twitter. We don't know. But regardless, it's just crazy to watch. Like, even if you're upset about that, the fact that he walked off the field and was like waving at the crowd and cut through the end zone during play is just wild, regardless of why. It's just something that you don't see every day.
Yeah. I think you mentioned, we didn't see all this until I've almost got it. I've almost got my spot figured out. Uh, you mentioned that with Big Ben and Le'Veon Bell on that team. I mean, it was a really great team, a great core. And maybe Tomlin had something to do with hiding some of the antics that Antonio Brown had at the time. I mean, we were in a connected time around 2012, 2013, 2014, 2015. We had technology then, obviously. But now there's technology, there's eyes everywhere now. It just seems like everything's broadcasted. With TikTok and all these different streaming platforms, nothing is hidden anymore for stars and pretty much anybody. And maybe that factors in. Maybe it's just a lot easier for them to get out. I don't know what Antonio Brown was like while he was a Steeler. I don't know. I know
I do remember, I don't know if you remember this, but during their playoff game, Tomlin was talking to the team in the locker room, and AB took his phone out and started recording Tomlin speaking, and he went on IG Live during the post-game locker room speech. And that's like
I don't remember that.
A huge deal at the time. And, Tomlin was so pissed off about that. And, I mean, rightfully so. I mean, as a coach, you want that to be players only. Like, you don't want that to leak out, whatever he says, good or bad. So I think that's kind of my first memory of like AB doing something that he probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, I do remember that. Now you talk about it, I remember that being a thing, and which sounds such a little deal now compared to everything else that's happened. But you do talk about how it is lost how good he is, or was during that time. In a time with Calvin Johnson, Julio Jones, all in their prime, Larry Fitzgerald, Greg Jennings, name it. Name all the receivers you want to at that time. Des Bryant was the top receiver at that point, and he was better than all of them. The top three guys, Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson, and Antonio Brown, they were a little bit closer, but still, as far as being an overall receiver, he didn't have the size that Julio and Calvin Johnson had, but everything else he had. He could create separation. He had better footwork. He had these great hands. He could always get open, no matter what. He was just so doggone good, and it's wild.
Like one of the great route runners of this generation. I think that.
Did you see him put Bryce Hall on skates in that Jets game before he ran off the field? I know it's when you're a pro guy, but
yeah, the talent's still kind of there. I have no doubt that he still has something left in the tank. It's just what team is going to take a gamble on that, knowing that he might walk out the next time that he plays. He might walk out and just leave your team during the game. I mean, that's.
Yeah, you think
I would really like to see happen out of this. I would like to see him get an opportunity in the XFL because they need eyeballs, and Antonio Brown would be a perfect fit for that. He could make his money. He could still be AB. do whatever he wants to do. But I think the XFL, that makes sense for both sides because AB can keep playing, and the XFL gets this like must see personality.
Can you see? And I wonder because the XFL is trying to legitimize themselves, right? They're trying to come around this time and say, hey, we're just basically going to try to be a minor league. We're not trying to do like the whole wrestling thing that was just like the last time they tried it. It's like, hey, we're just trying to be legit this time. So I even wonder then, will they try to get AB? It's like, oh, there they are trying to get their sensationalism back. So even that's a question. But, man, can you imagine him cooking some of the guys that are going to be XFL DBs? I mean, gee. Like, some of these guys might be faster than him at this point in his career, but not a single one of them. They could put four guys on him, and not one of them could cover him.
I feel like if he did that, then he could set some single season records in the XFL that would stand for years.
Yeah, which would be wild. Now, it would be interesting. It is a saga that we're going to continue to watch. I also think the timing works out for someone like Antonio Brown because I've seen his name all over the socials since this has happened. Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, all these things, all these live streams. I don't know how much money he's making off of these live streams and things like that. It is a perfect time for him to say, "Hey, look, I'm just going to stop playing football." You know, everybody knows my name. Everybody wants to hear what I'm talking about. Everybody thinks I'm crazy. You know, I'm not saying he orchestrated this whole thing, but the timing does work out. That usually when guys get kicked out of football, like Terrell Owens and guys like that just are quote cancerous to a team, a lot of times they just kind of fade out because Ocho Cinco because they don't have a platform. But now he's got plenty of platforms and he can still make money. People will still watch him just because he's Antonio Brown. I think it is a perfect time, if there ever is a perfect time, to get kicked out of the NFL for someone like him.
That T.O. is wanting to make a comeback.
Well, it's been like that for the past couple of years, and he could probably still be better than some of these average receivers, though. But he's like 48 now, 46, something like that.
Yeah, I think he's like 47, 48.
And if now T.O., at the time that he left the NFL, not too much older than Antonio Brown is right now when he left and he couldn't get signed by a team because of his personality. And Antonio Brown, I think, is a much more incendiary character to bring in at this point.
So T.O.'s 48 right now, and his last year in the league was with Cincinnati in 2010. He was 37.
Yeah, so he's a good few years older. I thought it was closer to 35, but that was the Buffalo years. But and he couldn't get picked up. And I think T.O. probably is a better receiver overall when you take everything into consideration than Antonio Brown. When you just take all that into consideration, he couldn't get on a team. And at the time, he probably wasn't the fastest he's been. He wasn't 4.4 anymore. That was never really his quality. He's just a big body, and he still had that. It just couldn't create as much separation. But the teams he was on weren't great. They had the Tiocho show for a while. So the whole thing's been a real interesting case study. If there is any brain damage, if there is anything that's going on with Antonio Brown, I hope he gets some help. But if not, I'm sure we'll still keep hearing about him. He's going to be an influencer at some point, I'm sure. I guess he already is one. But he'll be in the picture for a while. It'll be like the Paul brothers. We're not gonna stop hearing about Antonio Brown for quite a while. All right. Well, I guess that's it. You have anything else about Antonio Brown before we move on?
No, I don't want to talk about the Paul brothers because we'll be here for hours. My opinions on the Paul brothers.
Oh, yeah, well, brilliant businessmen. They've made a career over people wanting to watch them get punched in the face, and it's pretty good business, I guess. Okay. Before we get started on the next topic, if you happen to pop in and listen to what we say and like what we say, make sure you leave a like and possibly even subscribe to the channel so that you can keep up with all the things we talk about. Austin and I really love talking about football and the draft, players, playoffs, college football. So if you like any of that stuff, you'll probably like what we talk about. and we're pretty handsome. Make sure you keep on tuning in to the Hogmolly Hustle. We got plenty more to show you. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to our next discussion. So, like I said with the Antonio Brown stuff, I have been on socials a lot. I'm not a huge social guy. I'm not a huge tweeter. I'm not a huge Instagrammer. Most of the pictures on my Instagram are of my feet with scenic backdrops. Very artsy. But one thing I did see following the college football playoffs was people saying, yep, here we go, SEC in the national championship. The SEC is built different. And the response to that is, they're not built different. Georgia and Alabama are built different. The rest of the SEC stinks. Which may or may not be true. So I did some digging. I put together some standings here. And let me see if I can get this to work. Now, I really hope that I don't ruin this. Last time I tried to share something, it ruined our recording. So hopefully that's not the case. Okay. So here is the standings. Let me see if I can increase it a little bit. All right. That looks good, and hopefully that looks good on the camera. Don't know how that's going to look. I'll have to see when the recording comes back. But I looked through some things. I got all the standings as they are this year. I didn't want to mess with last year and the year before that and just go through all the historic things. I didn't have time for that. But I saw some of the SEC teams at the top, some of the ACC teams, the Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12. A lot of the usual names are at the top. That doesn't change around all that much. The ACC kind of floats around this year. But one thing I saw when I was looking across was that when I see these SEC teams that people are saying, well, they're pretty bad. I look at some of these other teams, and if you just go straight across from the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth place, I don't see a lot of these teams in the conference beating SEC teams. And that's not to say the SEC is built different, but there are a lot of good teams here. And when you look at some of the conference records versus the overall records, some of these conference records for these teams in the SEC aren't that good, which is why they're ranked a little bit lower. But then when you look at their overall records, they're better than their conference records. So when they're playing out of the conference, they play a little bit better. I don't know what that says. I'm just looking at the data. I really don't know what to say here. I don't know if they are built different. What do you think, Austin?
I mean, I think the SEC is definitely built different. I don't know how you couldn't think that if you've watched college football specifically the last like 5 to 10 years. If you look at the SEC standings, Georgia, Bama, LSU, and Auburn have all four been in the national title game in the last, 6-7 years? So that's 4 different teams that have participated in the national title game in the last decade. That's pretty good. Aside from that, all of these teams are either above 500 or darn near close to it. The teams that aren't are Florida, LSU, and Auburn. Those 3 teams had super down years. So, we were talking earlier. I feel like Kentucky at 10-3. The big bowl game victory over Iowa. I think that even Arkansas. Who did they beat? Penn State, I believe, in their bowl game.
Well, they were undefeated for a while up until they ran to Georgia.
Yeah, and then Georgia was the buzzsaw that they were and completely embarrassed them. But yeah, Arkansas beat a pretty decent Penn State team by 2 touchdowns in the Outback Bowl. Just when you look at the overall top to bottom strength of that conference, I don't know how you couldn't say that they're not, how could you say that they're not built different? Even teams like Tennessee, you look at the Big Ten, okay? best team in the Big Ten this year was Michigan. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm pretty sure Purdue beat Michigan? They beat two big teams. They beat Iowa and either. I'm gonna have to look that up because I don't want to. I don't want to
spout nonsense.
The wrong way, right? But in that bowl game, Tennessee is not one of the better SEC teams. I mean, they're just not. And they took Purdue to overtime and lost in a field goal in that game. Because even though Purdue had one of their best seasons in a long time, they beat Michigan State, they beat Iowa. They lost to Ohio State, sure, but had a really good season. Middle of the pack SEC team still took them to the wire. So when you look top to bottom, there's such consistency. And it's not just, you know that Bama's going to be good every year. But aside from Bama and Georgia, I feel like in the last 5-6 years, the other teams in the SEC take turns being really, really good. Florida's had a few years post Urban Meyer era that they had 8, 9, 10 win seasons. Auburn had their run where they were really, really good. Auburn took Bama to the wire this year. And just because they were 6-7 doesn't mean that they wouldn't be an above 500 team in the Pac-12. In fact, if you transplant Florida, LSU, and Auburn in the Pac-12 or Big 12 and replace those three with some of the middle of the pack teams in those conferences, I would venture to say that they could make a push for maybe second or third place in those conferences. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, we've had a conversation before. This is a conversation for another time. But quarterback is very, very valuable. And a lot of these SEC teams have the same issue. They don't have a quarterback. Heck, one of the teams in the national championship arguably doesn't have a quarterback. They have a great story, but as far as top-tier talent, elite talent you would expect to be at an elite program, they don't have that. Now, this is not Stetson Bennett slander. I'm just calling it like it is. He's not the guy that you would want when you have the option to choose a guy like Bryce Young, right? So let me take it back to about, just kind of want to hear what your thought process is. Let's say 2012, 2013, around that time, SEC. What style of football would you expect to see from the SEC in that time?
Smash mouth. Really strong defenses. You're talking probably low-scoring games on CBS, running the ball a lot, pro-style offense, 2 tight end sets. Quite the opposite of the Big 12. The Big 12 went towards a spread, an air raid system, and the SEC kind of kept it inside. And if you like hogmollies, you like big guys, you like offense and defensive line going to war in the trenches, then the SEC was your conference to watch.
Yeah. And during that time, of course, you had guys like Derrick Henry, Leonard Fournette, Mark Ingram, all these top backs, even T.J. Yeldon. You had all these top backs. Trey Henderson. I mean, look at it. You had all these big, strong winning games in the SEC, but on the other side, you didn't have a lot of great quarterbacks. It was just one of those weird things. You said, well, Bama, you look at some of the quarterbacks they had, McElroy. Had a bunch of quarterbacks that were just not great pro-style quarterbacks, but they were good college quarterbacks in that system. And then they start bringing in guys, Jalen Hurts, Bryce Young, Tua, Mac Jones. that are really solid quarterbacks, really good quarterbacks, good quarterback crosses that translate to the NFL. Then you see an LSU quarterback go and have one of the greatest college football seasons ever passing. And you start seeing these teams start evolving in the SEC. And now a lot of those teams are adding that passing element, but they're keeping that run game. Georgia, they have all these talented receivers and running backs and defenses, but they still have yet to secure that elite quarterback. And I think if they get an elite quarterback, that team is entirely on a different level. And you look at Kentucky, they're still smash mouth. You look at Tennessee. Tennessee is one of those teams, you brought them up earlier, that always ranks on a most underwhelming team in college football. They're always on that list because their recruiting classes are always great. They get so many good recruits, but they just can't pull it together. They get so many good guys in and out of that program. They do a really good job of that, but for whatever reason, they just can't pull it together. And you just look up and down that team, even teams like Texas A&M. They've had their time, and they've had some. They are always in the top 10 for recruits. They just have so many good recruits coming in here. How could these teams not be different than the other conferences? Like, you just have so much talent. Ole Miss, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi State is even getting even better now. And Auburn, even though they've fallen out of favor for a lot of the more recent seasons, they still have a lot of talent. And they can still grind in the trenches with teams like Alabama to grind them down to a tough Iron Bowl this past season. Like, the SEC, are they built different? I don't know. I mean, you look at the Big Ten. We brought them up earlier, so I'll bring them back up. You look at that Big Ten. They're probably the team that I think has a lot of similarities to the SEC. They also have a lot of ground and pound, hard-nosed, tough football, some tough defenses. Talk about Wisconsin, Michigan State, Iowa, Ohio State, Michigan. These are all teams that typically have a strong running game, strong defenses guiding their teams. But then the drop-off in the Big Ten hits a little bit harder than the drop-off in the SEC. Not to mention, you have Oklahoma and Texas joining next year. So it's a really interesting conversation.
Because football in the South is king. I mean, you go to, Michigan, or you go to, I don't know, Minnesota, or Pennsylvania, or Beaver Stadium, and they love their football. Don't get me wrong, they love their football, but it's not king in the South. Football is a Friday, Saturday, Sunday event, and then Monday and Thursday as well. And I mean, talking about, is the SEC built different? If you don't think the SEC is built different, I challenge you to go look at the last 10 NFL drafts and track the number of players that were taken from each conference. And then you come back, even if you take out Alabama from that equation, it's still overwhelmingly dominated by the SEC because they have other teams that are capable of finding the right recipe and having a run, not sustained success like Bama, where year in, year out, they're in the CFP. They're almost always one of the top 5 teams at the end of the year, and they're regularly playing for a national title and often winning it. But you get guys like the LSUs of the world, the Auburns of the world, Florida when Urban Meyer was there, that make a run at the national title. Now it's Georgia and Kirby Smart. And so that's what truly separates them from their competition.
Yeah. Another thing with the Alabamas and the Georgias, Texas A&Ms, one of the biggest things you see when people look at schedules and they say, oh man, that's a really big game for Wake Forest, or that's a really big game for Pittsburgh, going against Alabama, Texas A&M, or Georgia, Florida, any of these teams from the SEC, any of those like 5 or 6 teams that should be around the top or middle of the SEC as the season goes on. Ole Miss. That's a really big game. You don't always say that when you talk about SEC teams playing other conferences. You might say for Ohio State. You might say for Penn State. Like I say, the Big Ten is probably the closest, I would say. But just the fact that when you look at schedules, you say, man, that's big. That's an SEC opponent. That's tough. That's going to be hard. That's going to be a hard-fought game. And App State played South Carolina not too long ago. And App State had a really good team. And had some good athletes. But once they played against South Carolina, a middle-of-the-pack SEC team.
At that time, they were like a 3 or 4 win team, too.
Yeah. So, middle-of-the-pack, middling. Again, they suffer from the whole quarterback issue that a lot of SEC teams do. But, man, they still had all these athletes. And these athletes were studs. I mean, I believe they still had Javon Kinlaw there.
Yep.
And he's a monster. J.C. Horn is there. I mean, you had these monster athletes on a middling team in the SEC, but then they go into the draft in the first round. They both go in the first round, and just all this talent spread around. I think it's really easy to look at Alabama and Georgia and say, well, people only talk about the conference because of them. But honestly, I don't think, if you were to go through the top 5, 6, 7, whatever you want to go through in the SEC, and just go straight across based on the records, and year in and year out matching up against other teams and other conferences, I don't know if they don't come out, out of 10 times, if they don't come out winning at least 5 of those matchups every single time. Because you look at the ACC.
If you take out Bama and Georgia, I'm willing to bet that conference is still better than the Pac-12. You're still going to have more national champions in that decade than you would from the Big 12, because the Big 12 likes to beat up on each other and have 3 or 4 horses that are really good, and then bottom feeders like Kansas who go 2-10, and you could literally pay people to go to those games and they would still say no.
Yeah. And also, side note, when I was doing all this research, I found out that Cincinnati has not lost very many games in the past few years. I went back and looked at some of the records. They went undefeated last year. They only lost a couple of games in the seasons before that, so they've been pretty successful. But they're a different animal, obviously, than Alabama and Georgia. We found that out in the playoffs.
I was proud of Cincinnati for putting up the fight that they did, though.
It was a lot closer than I thought.
Yeah, it wasn't like they just got obliterated.
So I guess we can take a segue here and put our verdict up about is the SEC built different? What do we think?
Absolutely.
Final verdict. I would tend to agree. I think part of the reason that Oklahoma and Texas are leaving their conference to go to the SEC is, it's stiffer competition. People say, oh, they're just not going to win that many games in the SEC. That shows you what people think of the SEC, but I think they're going to win their games. I think that Texas should be on a comeback. They got their quarterback now, probably, I guess. And then Oklahoma, we really don't know what to expect from Oklahoma. They've been a talented team for a while, even before Lincoln Riley got there. They're a premier team in college football. They should still do well. Of course, they may have just lost their quarterback in the transfer portal as well. So a lot of stuff up in the air for Oklahoma. But Oklahoma and Texas already rank pretty highly in recruiting every season. And then joining the SEC only helps that. So we don't know what to expect from that. But the SEC just got stronger. And that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 count to go across the conferences just got even tougher for other conferences. So I'm not sure what to expect from the future of the SEC. I mean, we got a lot of things changing. I do agree with you. The SEC is a different animal. It just is. The closest to it would be the Big Ten, in my opinion. You look at those teams year in and year out, they also have a lot of teams that struggle from not having a quarterback You look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin is one of the most underrated teams year in and year out. Stud running backs, fantastic defense. Jim Leonard has a ridiculous defense.
Huge, massive towers for offensive linemen. That
One of the blue blood areas
always has a massive offensive line,
and
it's just masterful to watch them run the ball.
Yeah, and it's not just size too. They're some of the most talented offensive line with the best pedigree. You have, Minnesota has a lot that come out. You have Wisconsin that comes out. Iowa. You got all these teams that you just know if you get an offensive lineman, they're going to know how to play the doggone game of football.
Penn State,
Ohio State,
Michigan. I think you're right there.
Also, Penn State might have some of the most freaky athletes year in and year out. They always have guys that are just dropping 4 threes at 300 pounds. It's like, what are you guys feeding these guys? Like, there's some sort of special juice in Happy Valley or whatever it's called. Okay, so we talked about Cincinnati. We talked about Alabama, Georgia. So now let's talk about the college football playoffs a little bit. There's not too much to say about Alabama and Cincinnati. We mentioned it a little bit that we're happy the game was as close as it was early on, but things just didn't work out. Now, Cincinnati has some really talented defensive backs, and I'm surprised they didn't bring more pressure to try to take away some time from Bryce Young and just let the defensive backs work. But they were just outmatched. I think everybody expected that. They're just outmatched. Very talented team. They deserve to be there, but not surprised by the result.
Love how after Alabama scored, 5 minutes into the game, I think Bryce Young had a touchdown, and everybody starts tweeting, "Oh, this is the last time that Cincinnati ever gets in the CFP. They'll never let the little guy in because they're going to get murdered on national television." All this stuff. I was so happy that they kept it close, that they made it a decent game. What Cincinnati showed tonight was more than what Michigan State showed years ago. It's more than what Notre Dame has showed in the past when they're in big games.
Or what Ohio State showed last year.
Right. So it's reassuring because if a team has the type of season that Cincinnati had, where they go undefeated, win their conference, beat some ranked teams, specifically beat Notre Dame on the road, they absolutely deserve one of those 4 spots. So I was thrilled that they held on as long as they could and made it as close as they could.
I think there's always this hate for the little guy in college football. I don't understand it. Because those same sentiments that they say, well, look, if they get slaughtered, that just shows you shouldn't have the little guy in there. It's like, well, maybe we shouldn't have an independent go into the playoffs. You talk about the schedule that Notre Dame has, and when they got to the playoffs and they got destroyed, and they've had a lot of outings where they run into some superior talent and they go apart. And of course, I don't hate Notre Dame, but I do think that some of the Notre Dame talk gets a little bit outrageous sometimes. You talk about Ohio State, and last year, some of the biggest talk when they were saying, do they deserve to get into the playoffs, only playing 6 games? And people say, well, they're the best team in the nation. And then, of course, they went ahead and beat Clemson, I believe it was. They said, look, we told you, they're the best team in the nation. And they go to Alabama, and there's a stark difference between the two. The talent level was just different. Justin Fields did not have his best game. I just don't get this little guy hate. I know people say, well, you got to sell the most tickets, do this or do that. I think it's going to sell tickets, and of course you know this better than I do. I think if you want to get the best stories in there, and I don't think putting Baylor or Oklahoma State, guys like that, Notre Dame. I don't think putting that in the Final Four over Cincinnati, I don't think that's going to be a better story. I think just from that perspective, that's not going to be a better story.
I think that from a revenue standpoint, if you have um, the big dogs in the fight, then you're going to make more money because you can charge more for tickets. You know, if you're setting a price point for Georgia versus, or excuse me, Bama versus Cincinnati, let's say that we could change that and make it to where Ohio State only had one loss heading into that, and they gave the 4 seed to Ohio State, then you could charge more money for a Bama Ohio State ticket than you could a Bama Cincinnati ticket, more than likely. You could probably get more eyeballs on that game on New Year's Eve if it's Ohio State, a larger name brand that you think, wouldn't be
A rematch.
bloodbath. It absolutely would be a rematch, but I see what you're saying, but I think that, like, for me, I have to separate my heart from my head, I guess. Like, think like a businessman instead of thinking like a fan. I'm sick of seeing the same teams. I mean, I completely understand what you're saying about, the little guy, and it's ironic because in college basketball, everyone loves the little guy, right? We get to March and there's a 14 seed playing a 3 seed, and no one is cheering for the 3 seed unless you are a specific fan of that school. We love the Cinderellas. If you're not a Virginia fan, you were cheering for UMBC to get that upset, that 16 over the 1 seed. It's just that the way that college football is set up to where, teams like Bama could have all of their starters out and they would still have a 5-star roster to throw out there. It's just that they would be younger. You wonder why that Bama team last year could win a title and then all of a sudden come back this year and be just as good after losing all kinds of talent to the NFL. I mean, look at the wide receivers from Bama that have went to the NFL in the last 2-3 years. I mean, Jerry Jeudy, you got Henry Ruggs, you got Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith. Even before that, Julio Jones. I mean, Amari Cooper. Just loads of talent on the offensive and defensive line, dude. I think that Bama put like 3 or 4 offensive line in the NFL last year through the draft, and probably some more through undrafted free agency. And then this year, look at Evan Neal. He's like arguably the number 1 tackle prospect in the draft. I mean, they just reload, and it's a never-ending cycle,
And if you look at the recruiting classes every single year, it seems like Alabama's always recruiting 2 of the nation's top tackles every single year. And they just go there and sit. So when the other 2 get drafted, they're like, all right, it's our turn. They play a couple of years, then they get drafted. The next guys that were sitting, they play a couple of years, they get drafted. I mean, it's just a pipeline.
That's such a good system, though, because iron sharpens iron. And if you're going against NFL caliber talent every day in practice, best believe you're going to be ready for anything that life throws at you, throughout the rest of your career.
Yeah, and another team here that you talk about Ohio State, if things would have changed a little bit, if Clemson would have changed a little bit and they could have got in, that would have been interesting, another rematch type deal. I think Clemson should be on the rebound after this year. They're not a bad team. People want to say, oh, well, Clemson stinks now when they're talking about Georgia. There was a lot of talk about removing Georgia from after they got beat by Alabama. Like, well, they don't deserve to be there. It's like, what, they beat a bad Clemson team? It was like a Clemson team that was ranked in the top 3 at the beginning of the season. They beat them. The same Clemson team that started at the end of the season 10-3. I mean, with all this talent they still have, Clemson was pretty good. They just don't have the quarterback stuff figured out right now. They don't have a guy they can trust. But they got a top recruit that's there ready to take over. And they got some good offensive prospects around that. So they'll be back in it. And all this talk, well, they played Arkansas, middling, the SEC team in Florida when they were on a downspin. No, they caused the downspin. So I think all this talk about Georgia not being in was silly. I think that was just people trying to say, oh, my team deserves to be in there. My 5 or 6, 7 seed deserves to be in there. Look how hard they fought. The
Yeah.
talent's different.
If you play in the SEC and give up a touchdown a game, you should be. I mean, come on, just stop it.
Yeah. So, talking about Georgia, this was the game that got carried away before. Let me rephrase that. Of the games I expected to be a blowout very quickly, this was not the game I expected to be a blowout very quickly. I thought it was going to be a lot closer, but it wasn't. Um, Jordan Davis destroyed a lot of schemes in this game. I mean, a lot of the play calls, a lot of pulling guards, a lot of moving zone blocking, he just ate it up. He got through there. He just completely blew up so many plays and showed how effective he is. Still, come around draft time, we'll talk more about this as we get closer to draft time. Probably 2, sometimes a 3 down guy. Be interested to see what that does for his draft stock there. He's not the guy that's going to be on the field every single play on all scenarios. But when he's out there, he's smart. He uses his hands. He gets in. He disrupts the play. That's everything you want from a defensive tackle. And he just shredded him. And on the other side, Sawyer for Alabama did a real good number on Aiden Hutchinson, the projected first overall pick in the draft. We love him, Aiden Hutchinson.
Georgia.
Yeah.
You said Bama.
Oh, well, the SEC, it's all the same, right? We just talked about this.
Right.
But for Aiden Hutchinson getting stood up by Georgia, tackle Sawyer. And I saw a tweet talking about that from, I think it was Jeff Saturday, where he was talking about a high school camp. I think it was the showing or one of those big Nike showing events, where Sawyer was blocking Aiden Hutchinson one-on-one all day in one-on-ones. And then Aiden Hutchinson and him ended up getting into a fight because Sawyer was shutting him down the entire time. And he said, sometimes you know the outcome before the game starts. And maybe that factored in. I don't know. I thought Aiden Hutchinson played as well as he could in that situation. I thought that was a perfect game plan to get him disrupted. I felt like Aiden Hutchinson kind of got in the habit of using a few of his best moves, and it wasn't getting stopped all year. And then once it got stopped, he kind of lost momentum. He's got really good hands. He's got a good rip under move. He can bull through most people. But Sawyer did a really good job of shutting him out. But I still think he's going to get picked in the top 5, obviously. But that will be an interesting story to watch. But it was a good showcase in the trenches in that game. What did you think from the game?
I think that for the Michigan Wolverines to win that game, I think we all knew that their offense had to play to the best of their capabilities. Because heading into that game, I didn't have any doubts that their defense could live up to the hype and they could potentially disrupt some of the things that Georgia was going to do, specifically if they were going to pass with Bennett. I trusted that pass rush to disrupt his rhythm and make it tough on them to move the ball if they couldn't establish the run. I had zero faith in Michigan's offense. And again, that stems from the quarterback position. I don't think that they have the type of quarterback that can be counted upon to put up 28 points, which is what, probably the minimum that you would need to beat a Georgia team that good. If that Michigan team could put up maybe 2 or 3 touchdowns and put some pressure on Georgia, then they might have had a chance at winning that game. But because the field position game was the way it was, they didn't really stand a chance. So that, there's some rumors flying that Harbaugh might be leaving Michigan and potentially going to the Chicago Bears, potentially going to the Las Vegas Raiders to replace Gruden. We don't know what's going to happen. But if he were to stay, I think that's the problem that Harbaugh's faced from day one is establishing a decent offense at Michigan. I mean, their offense was better when Denard Robinson was there. They were scoring more points then than they have during the Harbaugh era. Still can't talk today. But, if you want to be an elite team, then that's the next step, right? He built a defense that, with Ojabo and Hutchinson opposite sides of each other, that were a quarterback's nightmare. But once they get off the field, can your offense do what it needs to do to score 7 points and put your team in a position to win? And they couldn't.
Yeah, and I think the defense definitely has been one of the big successes in his time at Michigan. I mean, talk about Rashawn Gary, some other defensive players that they've had within his time there. They definitely had the good defensive players. They've had some good offensive linemen as well. Michael Onwenu, he was a guy that I loved last year. I'm glad to see he's been doing pretty well with New England. I think the biggest disappointment, aside from the whole Ohio State thing, I think that's just more of a timing thing with Ohio State being as good as they've been. I think the biggest disappointment for Harbaugh, being a quarterback guy, is that he could never get that quarterback to really excel. There have been decent college quarterbacks there, but it just shows how rare quarterbacks can be. You can have all these great quarterback coaches, but they just can't always hit. And I think it was a little bit weird at Oklahoma when you saw Rattler not doing what Kyler and Baker Mayfield had done. And then Caleb Williams coming in and doing really, really well given the situation as a true freshman, just coming in and doing that. And now he might be leaving. I think that quarterbacks just, it's tough to find one. It's tough to find one that can really do anything. Those elite guys really are elite for a reason. I think we've passed around, talk about franchise quarterback, elite quarterback. It's just passed around too freely. It's a very, very small number. And I think that's what makes it so impressive. Once you see guys get to pros that just have it. Your Andrew Luck, your Aaron Rodgers, these guys that are just different breeds of quarterback. And then you see other quarterbacks that are really good, but they have their limitations. Matt Ryan's, guys like that are elite quarterbacks that are just limited in what they can do. But then you compare to them some of the other guys. It's just a really, really rare skill set. Like, people don't understand. Like, talk about it all the time. People don't understand how good these quarterbacks are. Like, even guys like Baker Mayfield, like, really successful in college. They have all these tools you like, but get to the pros and just some things just aren't working. I do think he'll have a job next year. He'll have a job somewhere. It may not be with the Browns, but he'll have a job somewhere. We'll talk about that for another time. Or talk about that at another time. Is that it?
You don't want me to talk about Baker. We'll be here for a long time.
Yeah. Well, we ain't got too much time. So, do you have the playoff stuff pulled up?
Yeah.
Was that a real confirmation, or was that just I'll pull it up right now?
Endless possibilities with an iPhone.
So, we talked about a lot of things. One, the Lions. They started picking up steam here towards the end. I want to see what they do here at the end of the season. They could have a real big game for them against the Packers here on Week 18. I absolutely love. They've been doing this for a few years now, even before the extra game. But putting all these division games at the end of the season, I love that so much. Just because it doesn't matter how bad teams are. If it's a division game, it can be close. It does not matter how bad they are. Division games are just totally different. And I just love it. I think the Packers should be able to run away from the Lions, but crazy things happen. I think Rodgers hopefully only plays a couple, maybe a quarter, and hopefully they can get ahead and then move on. But He wants to kind of stay there. He is going to play, so we'll see what happens. But the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Raiders, Tennessee has to wrap things up against Houston. Will Derrick Henry come back? He's apparently cleared to come back, or should be cleared to come back this weekend.
He's coming back.
And how much does he play? I saw a picture. I saw a picture of it's like Derrick Henry returning from the IR. It was a picture of an old Tennessee Titans lineman that looks a lot like Derrick Henry, or maybe they just like patted him up. All his big cheeks and his big ears, like coming back. It just made me laugh a lot. But seeing that team as well as they've played, and he comes back, there's just so much stuff happening. What are some of the ones you're looking at?
Well, I mean, looking at the playoff picture right now, if the season were to end today, then you got first round bye for the Titans. Okay, and Titans would get the first round bye, and then in the AFC wild card, you're looking at Chiefs versus Chargers, so an AFC West matchup there. Bengals versus Colts, Bills versus Patriots. So we've got some interdivision games there. On the AFC side of things, I think the matchup that would intrigue me most is probably Chiefs and Chargers. I mean, Justin Herbert has had his moments this season, and we've kind of seen him and Patrick go at it a little bit with some post-game handshake stuff. There's a little bit of drama there, but I mean, just from a talent standpoint, those two teams are super talented. It would be played at Kansas City, so I think that would be a tough game. And then I'm also intrigued to see what Joe Burrow can do in the playoffs. I mean, the Cincinnati Bengals are one of the greatest success stories in the NFL this year.
Can we talk about the big, giant iron balls on Zach Taylor for the way he played that game against the Chiefs? Like, holy cow. Like, he's like, I'm going for it. And they get the penalty. It's like, or whatever it was that caused them to go for it again. I think it was a penalty. They said, we're going for it again. And then they get it's like, oh my gosh, here they are. They're about to go for it. They're going to dive in there. Then Joe Burrow goes out. They bring in the backup quarterback. He runs out there. It's like, because they had the first and goal. I was like, is he going to go for it with the backup quarterback? Like, oh, he's just taking the kneel. He's going to take the field goal here. But man, I loved it because I said, well, you know what? I was with Tony Romo. I said, absolutely, you gotta kick it. I'm a big weenie. I'm not. This is the Chiefs, but at the same time, you gotta go for it. It's the Chiefs, and he did it, and that was huge. I think that is a huge momentum builder for the Bengals, because let's say they do go and score that touchdown, they win like that, fantastic. They win the game anyway, fantastic. But if they were able to score that touchdown and then win, just the momentum is huge. They're like, hey, they weren't scared and they beat these top dogs. That's how you go into the playoffs. Instead of just taking the easy way and then hoping they don't score on you.
Right.
That's just the way that we've seen Staley play with Los Angeles. And sometimes he needs to pull it back a little bit. He goes for it on almost every fourth down. You talk about the analytics of it and whether that's a good decision or not. But sometimes you don't have to. But he's gutsy. He knows that's how you beat good teams. So watching matchup 3 with the way the other two games have went, Chargers-Chiefs definitely a huge game. Patriots-Buffalo, whether it's in Buffalo or not, okay? If the weather is bad, that favors the Patriots. I mean, look at the first game they played. Bad weather. If it affects the passing game, whether you're home or not, I mean, you think back to were they at home when they were at home when they played Baltimore, right? And Justin Tucker missed like 5 kicks.
You're talking about New England?
No, Buffalo.
Buffalo.
When Tucker missed like 4 kicks.
When Buffalo played Buffalo didn't play the Ravens this year.
No, I mean last year, like in the playoffs last year.
Oh, I can't.
Last year I think it was. I think it was in Buffalo because you when you watch that Josh Allen's passes were sounding like they're a big pass team. That was, you clearly made it. It was tough. It's tough to throw in heavy wind like that. And when Justin Tucker's missing 4 field goals, like just the wind's a huge factor. So I think if the weather's bad and it affects the passing game, whether you're at home or not, I think that game against New England is going to be tough. I think the further New England gets into the playoffs, the more and more it looks like they'll be in that AFC Championship, and then possibly even in the Super Bowl. Like all these AFC teams, they could either pop out of the first round or go to this AFC Championship. I know that sounds like a kind of silly statement, but it's just they're all such wild cards. There's no clear cut
Anything
team.
can happen. I don't think
Which
that
is
anybody
awesome.
has really separated themselves on that side of football this year, and that's what's so awesome about the playoffs is that, I mean, the AFC especially, but really the whole field is going to be kind of like a March Madness type layout. Like you don't go into these wild card games thinking, oh well, there's no way that team's going to get murdered. You know, there's no way that this is going to be a game that team's going to get killed. I mean, the NFC side, you got the Packers with the first round bye. If I had told you after week 1 that the Packers would win 13 or possibly even 14 games, I think you would have taken that, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wasn't worried. It was just the Saints and Jameis Winston. It didn't bother me at all.
So Packers get the bye. If the season ended today, the Packers would get the bye. Rams and Eagles. Okay, I think obviously think that the Rams probably hold the upper hand there. The Bucks and the 49ers. The 49ers are a super talented team. If their quarterback play can play up to you know up to their capability, then that could be a close game. But I mean, it is Tom in the playoffs. It's hard to bet against Tom in the playoffs. And then what's interesting is that Dallas and Arizona is that third matchup, and Dallas is currently the 4 seed, and Arizona is the 5 seed. Now, they just played each other January 2nd. Arizona was able to beat Dallas by 3 at Dallas. So it'll be interesting to see how this last week plays out because they're currently both 11-5, and Arizona obviously beat Dallas. So I'm assuming that they hold the tiebreaker. Now Dallas is at Philly on Saturday night, and Arizona they play the Seahawks on Sunday at 4:30 in Phoenix. So
Both of those teams could easily lose both of those games. Like those are not easy games. Philadelphia's
even if
playing
they both
great.
lose, then they're still locked into that 4 and 5 seed.
Yeah, so they can't get away from each other. Philadelphia's playing really well right now. So we'll see what happens. There's a lot of interesting storylines going into this Week 18.
I think
That feels
might
weird.
be a possibility that if one of them wins and advances to 12-5, and then if the Rams or Bucks fumble the bag and end up losing, Rams play the 49ers and the Bucks play. Oh yeah, they get to crucify the Panthers.
I'm going to be honest. I was really hoping that by the time we got back to record this after 2 months, that Matt Rule would have been fired, and we would have been talking about some interesting storylines there.
That would have been done. I mean, we've seen how Byron Joe Brady really helped us from day one. Like, I don't understand why that's a move that you make during the season.
That
But
that's a CYA move from Matt Rule. I think he's saying it was his fault. It's not the offense's fault. His fault. Let's blame it on the kid.
Yeah.
It did also. I mean, we could talk about this more at a different time, but the move did scream nepotism, or not I think that's right. But when his buddy from college is the guy that replaces him, And he says, "Yeah, you're going to be the one running the offense now." And then you start seeing it. It's like, I think the offense is worse now.
It absolutely is.
And now they're looking at trading Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah,
It's
I started to say. So we'll see. I think the Panthers are currently looking at potentially the sixth pick. Let's give a little update on, for some of these fan bases that don't have a lot to look forward to
yeah.
until
Let's
April.
cheer it up a little bit after we brought it down after all that energy.
So currently the Jaguars are 2-14. So Urban Meyer
And they play
strong there.
Yeah, well, rest in peace, Urban. But they're playing who? The Colts.
So that's probably another loss.
Yeah, should be.
15 has a nice ring to it. The Lions are 2-13-1. The Giants are 4-12. The Texans are 4-12. The Jets are 4-12. The Panthers are 5-11. So the Panthers are currently locked into the sixth pick. And then there are 3 6-10 teams above the Panthers. It's the Seahawks, Bears, and the Washington football team, who I have heard through back channels on Twitter, and this is not official, but just to give our listeners a little inside scoop that could potentially be true about a potential name change. I am hearing that the Washington football team is going to be rebranded as the Washington Commanders.
From my sources, I think I can confirm that. I've got some guys that are on the inside, and they have confirmed that that's definitely what it's going to be. So you heard it here first, officially, that the Washington football team is now the Washington Commanders. So there you go. Breaking news in the Hogmolly Hustle.
We're 83% sure.
Closer to 93.
Sounds good.
So do you have anything else that you want to go over before we end this?
Real quick, what happens on Monday night in the national championship game? Prediction, go.
Ooh.
Georgia
I
versus
think that
Bama.
I know who it is. We spent a whole podcast talking about it.
Game for the ages.
See,
Talking about
I think
matchup we haven't seen in years.
I think every hero's story has highs and lows. The unlikely beginnings, fighting through, getting to a great position, really solidifying himself as a starting quarterback in college football. Stetson Bennett led his team to many triumphs. Now, it wasn't easy. He wasn't the guy they wanted at first. But then he comes in and he fights his way through. He claims his role as the leader of that team, but then he hits a wall. Things are going well. It looks like all the things are going to do. It was going to be an easy walk. He was destined for this, but then he hits a wall and runs into Alabama. Everybody starts falling apart. They say, this is it. He's not good. Can't do it. He can't lead this team. Should they bring the old quarterback in? Is it time to give up on Stetson Bennett? No. They turn around in a big game against Michigan and dominate. And through all this, he hasn't cracked. He's gotten better throughout the season. He's tried to give everything he's got for this team. And now he's ready to defeat Alabama. To hush the haters all throughout the nation, Stetson Bennett, the unlikely hero of Georgia, wins the national championship.
Yeah, if I were putting money on the game, I would probably go with Nick Saban. He has a lot of rings. But I'm going to follow the heart here, and I'm going to say that the Dogs are going to win a classic national championship game. I think that this has the potential to be every bit as good as their matchup. When was it? 2018? I think so. We all remember that game. Tua Tagovailoa coming in, one of the biggest moments in college football history. I mean, that was, aside from the Rose Bowl with Vince Young's touchdown versus USC, I think that's probably the most iconic um, college football moment of my lifetime. You could make an argument for maybe the kick six or something like that, but that was big time. So I got the Dogs winning. I'm gonna say I don't think I think it's going to be more high scoring than people think. I'll say 31-27.
31-27.
I think Young's going to throw an interception early, and Georgia's going to capitalize and take a 14-0 lead.
I think it's going to be a weird score here. I think it's going to end up being 28-26. I think there will be a safety at some point, probably against Georgia. I think Stetson Bennett's going to try to roll out, do what he does best, roll out of the pocket, and possibly get tackled for a loss there. And some people say, well, this is it. This is where things fall apart. But then they fight back, and they hang on to the win. Who knows?
Hope you're right.
It's going to be a fun one. So if you've stuck around or you tuned in at any point and you like what you saw, please like and subscribe. We do this every week except for when we don't, but there's usually holidays in between. And if you disagree or agree with anything we say, leave a comment in the comment section, wherever that may be. We will be back next week to see if we were right about our predictions. And to follow our predictions to end this podcast strong, can we get a good little co-op dog it out here? Like a little woof woof, woof 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 woof. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, you're not doing it with me now. That was just me doing it. No, it's not all that good. All right. We're back next week, guys.